lone rancher paid $2 for giant bride with sack on her head at auction. Marries her when she say name. The morning sun rose slowly over the small town of Willow Creek. The town was quiet, as it often was, except for the soft sounds of roosters crowing and horses moving in their stables. In the distance, the tall, dry grass of the surrounding plains shimmered with dew. It was the kind of morning that made people feel calm and hopeful, even if life in Willow Creek was simple and hard at times. Among the people waking up and starting their day was John Miller, a lone rancher in his early 40s. John had lived in Willow Creek his whole life, inheriting the small ranch from his father. He had no wife and no children, just a handful of horses, cows, and the quiet comfort of his routine. John was the type of man who kept to himself. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-tanned skin from long days under the open sky. Brands. His hands were rough and calloused, proof of years of hard work. He didn't talk much, and the few words he spoke were always measured. People in town respected him for his honesty and his steady nature, though some called him strange because he rarely socialized outside of work. John didn't mind. But on this particular morning, John was walking toward the small town square with a sense of curiosity. Breath. Today was auction day, and auctions in Willow Creek were always lively events. People from nearby farms and ranches came to buy and sell everything from cattle to old tools, and sometimes even unusual items that no one expected. John didn't go to the auction to meet people. He went to see what caught his attention, and maybe, just maybe, find something useful for his ranch. When he reached the dusty square, the crowd was already forming. Men and women, some on horseback and some on foot, were chatting, laughing, and preparing to bid. The auctioneer, a lively man with a booming voice, stood on a small platform calling out the items with practiced rhythm. First came the livestock, cows, pigs, and a few horses. John watched carefully, checking the animals for health and strength. Then came tools, wagons, and farm equipment. Bray. Nothing unusual yet. Then, near the back of the auction, something caught John's eye. At first he thought he was imagining it. Among boxes, crates, and bundles, there was a very tall woman with a burlap sack over her head. She stood quietly, her posture straight and composed, unlike the other items around her. She didn't struggle or make a sound, which made her even more mysterious. The crowd began to murmur. People were curious, but mostly confused. No one had ever seen a woman sold at an auction like this, and certainly not one wearing a sack over her head. Some of the onlookers laughed. "Who would pay for that?" a man shouted. "She looks like a scarecrow!" Another woman shook her head. "This is ridiculous. Why is she even here?"
People whispered to each other, making guesses.
Maybe she was a runaway from a rich family, or maybe it was some kind of joke. But everyone agreed. This was the strangest thing they had ever seen at an auction. John, however, did not laugh. He did not make jokes. Something about the tall woman with the covered face made him pause. He felt a curious pull, a strange mixture of surprise, concern, and intrigue. He couldn't explain it, but he felt that there was more to her than what everyone else was seeing. He wondered why she had a sack over her head. Was she hiding something? Was she embarrassed? Or was someone trying to control her life in a way that seemed unfair? The auctioneer, noticing the crowd's reaction, decided to describe the item in his own way. Breaths. Here we have a tall, strong woman, mysterious and unusual. She comes with no known family, and she appears calm and composed. Who will start the bidding? The crowd laughed and joked again. John shook his head slightly as if to clear his thoughts. He wasn't interested in the laughter. He was interested in the woman herself. He raised his hand. Not because he wanted to show off, not because he wanted to join in the joke, but because he felt that he should. The auctioneer looked surprised, raising his eyebrows. "Do I hear $2?" he asked.
A few people laughed. Ha 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 ha!
"That's all it takes!" someone shouted from the crowd. But John kept his hand raised. There was something about the woman that told him she deserved more than jokes. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew that he wanted to take responsibility for her, even if he didn't know why. $2. It was a small amount, almost nothing, but to John it was a start. The auctioneer nodded, a little confused, but accepted the bid. "Diz. Sold. $2 to the tall man over there." He gestured toward John. A few people clapped, half in amusement, half in disbelief. Some still whispered, "Who buys a woman with a sack over her head for $2? John didn't respond. He simply walked forward, ready to take the woman home. As he approached, he noticed how tall she really was. Even with the sack covering her face, her height was impressive. She moved gracefully, without fear, and her hands were calm, resting at her sides. John felt a strange mixture of respect and curiosity. He didn't speak much to her yet. She remained silent, but he could feel a quiet presence about her, a calm strength that seemed unusual and captivating.
Other people at the auction continued to laugh or shake their heads, but John ignored them.
He carefully helped the woman down from the small platform. She didn't resist. Breath. She didn't speak. She only looked straight ahead, her body still and composed. John offered his hand to guide her, and she accepted it, gently. The crowd began to disperse, leaving John and the woman alone among the dusty crates and abandoned bundles. As they walked toward his wagon, John tried to imagine what her life might have been like before this strange auction. Who was she? Why was she here? Why had no one come for her before now?
He didn't ask aloud.
Brace. Somehow he felt that questions could wait. For now, the moment itself, the quiet morning, the unexpected encounter, was enough. When John lifted her into the wagon, she didn't speak, but she didn't resist. She seemed calm, almost as if she had expected this all along. John adjusted the burlap sack carefully so it wouldn't slip, but he didn't try to remove it. That part, he decided, was hers to control. He started the horses, and the wagon moved slowly across the dusty road, leaving the auction yard behind. On the way home, John noticed the way the wind played with the edges of the sack. The sun shone on her, highlighting the tall, quiet figure. He thought of all the stories that could explain her presence. Perhaps she had run away from a strict home. Perhaps she had been treated unfairly by society. Or perhaps her story was something entirely different, something that no one in the town could guess. The mystery made John more curious, but he felt no fear, only a quiet determination to help her in whatever way he could. As they neared the ranch, the familiar landscape of fields, barns, and fences came into view. John felt a small sense of relief. He knew that at his ranch she would be safe. There was no crowd to judge her, no whispers to make her feel unwelcome. He planned to give her space, to let her adjust, and to wait for the moment she might speak. The woman, still silent, watched the passing scenery with a quiet intensity. John noticed small details, the way she held herself, the calm in her eyes, the subtle movements of her hands. He realized that, for all her silence and mystery, she was observant, aware, and perhaps wiser than most people he had known. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was higher in the sky, casting warm light across the fields. John led the woman down from the wagon and guided her toward the main house. He had prepared a small room for guests long ago, and he decided it would be the perfect place for her to rest. She stepped inside quietly, her movements still graceful, still controlled. John watched her for a moment, feeling a mix of curiosity and admiration, but patient. He didn't know what her name was. He didn't know her story, but he knew one thing. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and somehow he felt that her presence in his life was meant to be. The day continued, with John tending to his usual ranch work while keeping an eye on his mysterious guest. He fetched water, prepared a simple meal, and ensured that she had everything she needed. She accepted everything quietly, never complaining, never asking. It was a strange beginning, almost surreal. But John felt that something extraordinary had started on this quiet morning. As evening approached, the ranch grew calm. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. John watched the woman sit by the window, still quiet, still mysterious. But he didn't know what the future held. But he felt a quiet certainty that this encounter, so strange, so unexpected, was the start of something important. And so the first day ended with silence, mystery, and a sense of anticipation. John didn't yet know her name, didn't yet know her story, but he knew one thing clearly. His life had just changed forever, and the quiet woman with the sack over her head had become a part of it. The wagon rattled softly over the uneven dirt road, the horse's hooves striking the ground with steady rhythm. John Miller held the reins firmly in his calloused hands, his eyes on the road ahead, but his mind kept drifting back to the mysterious woman sitting quietly beside him. The burlap sack still covered her head, hiding her face, yet he could sense her presence with a clarity that unsettled him in the best possible way. She did not fidget, nor did she make a sound. Her calmness was almost unnatural in the chaos of the auction he had just left behind.
John had expected the ride home to be awkward.
Desperate happens. He had imagined a few whispered questions or perhaps resistance from the woman. But none of that happened. She simply sat there, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Occasionally he would glance at her, catching the outline of her tall frame beneath the rough fabric. She was remarkably tall, even taller than him by several inches, and her posture gave her an air of quiet dignity that demanded respect. He found himself wondering about her life before that moment. Who was she? Why had she been at the auction? And why had no one come to claim her? He knew there were many stories in Willow Creek and the surrounding towns. Stories of young women sent away, left alone, or hidden for reasons no one would ever share. But something told John that her story was different.
It was not just the circumstances that made her stand out. It was her presence. She seemed aware, observant, and surprisingly patient.
The wagon jolted slightly over a rut, and John reached out instinctively to steady her. She did not flinch. Breaths. Instead, she adjusted herself gracefully, as if she had expected such bumps along the way. John was impressed. Most people would have stumbled or complained, but she remained composed, and in that moment, he felt a strange sense of connection. There was something in her demeanor that told him she was not just a woman who had ended up at an auction. She was someone who had learned to endure, to observe, and to survive. The ride continued in silence, broken only by the sound of the horses and the occasional creak of the wagon wheels. John's mind wandered to thoughts of home. Brett. He had a small ranch on the outskirts of town, a modest place with a few barns, a fenced pasture, and a house that had been in his family for generations. He had lived there alone for years, tending to his animals and managing the land. The idea of adding a stranger to his quiet life was both exciting and unsettling. He had never considered companionship seriously. His days had always been filled with work, routine, and the occasional visit to town. But there was something about this woman that made him reconsider. He thought about the sack over her head. Why was it bare? Was she hiding scars, or was it meant to protect her identity? Or perhaps it was a test, a way to see who would treat her with kindness despite the unusual situation. He didn't know, and he decided not to ask yet. Some things, he reasoned, needed time. He would let her reveal herself when she was ready. As the wagon neared the ranch, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over the fields. John noticed how the tall grass swayed in the breeze, and how the animals in the pastures looked up as the wagon approached. Horses neighed softly, and cows shifted in the dirt, sensing something unusual. The woman remained calm, observing the world with quiet interest. John realized that she was taking in everything, noticing details he had never paid attention to. Her presence seemed to make the world around her sharper, more vivid. When they reached the ranch, John guided the horses to the barn and unhitched them carefully. He then helped the woman down from the wagon. She moved with the same grace she had shown during the ride, her steps deliberate and controlled. John noticed the way her hands moved, gentle but precise, as if she had worked with her hands before. There was a quiet confidence about her that fascinated him. He led her toward the main house, which was small but well kept. The walls were painted white, and the windows reflected the bright sunlight. Inside, he had prepared a guest room, a simple space with a bed, a chair, and a small dresser. He thought it would be a good place for her to rest after the long journey. She followed silently, her movements careful and unhurried, as if she had been taught to walk with awareness at all times. Once inside the room, John placed a chair by the window and gestured for her to sit. She did so without hesitation, folding her hands in her lap. The room was quiet, except for the faint creaking of the wooden floorboards. John realized how unusual it was to have someone in his home who did not speak, yet whose presence felt comforting rather than strange. He decided to give her space, to let her adjust, and to observe her quietly. John busied himself with small tasks around the house, all while keeping an eye on his guest. He prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh fruit, placing it on a table near her. She did not reach for it immediately, only watching him with calm, attentive eyes. Grasp. He offered the food gently, and she nodded, accepting it without a word. Her manners were impeccable, polite, and thoughtful. John was struck by the contrast between her silence and the liveliness of the auction she had just left. Here she was composed, patient, and observant, a stark difference from the chaos of the town square. After the meal, John decided to take a walk around the property. He wanted to give her time to rest, but he also wanted to understand what kind of person she might be. As he walked among the barns and pastures, he thought about the life he had lived, quiet, solitary, predictable. And now, suddenly, someone else had entered it. Someone mysterious, tall and silent, who carried an air of quiet authority.
It was disconcerting but not unpleasant. In fact, it was intriguing.
When he returned to the house, he found her standing by the window watching the fields. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. John approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. He noticed how her eyes, visible now beneath the edge of the sack, seemed to absorb everything. The movement of the animals, the wind through the grass, the changing light. There was a depth there, a quiet intelligence that made him pause. He realized that her silence was not emptiness. It was observation, reflection, and perhaps even wisdom. "Do you need anything?" John asked softly, unsure if she would respond. She simply shook her head slightly, a gesture so subtle that it almost went unnoticed. Yet, in that small motion, John felt a sense of connection. She was acknowledging him, not with words, but with recognition. She was aware of him, and he was aware of her. That silent communication, he realized, was more powerful than anything he had experienced in years. As evening settled over the ranch, John began to feel a strange sense of anticipation. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, and didn't know what would happen next. but yet he felt certain that this encounter was important, that it would change the course of his life in ways he could not yet imagine. The mystery of the woman with the sack over her head had captured his attention completely. Breath. Night fell, and the ranch grew quiet. The animals settled into their pens, the wind whispered through the trees, and the sky turned a deep, velvety blue. John prepared a small bed in the guest room and left her to rest. She accepted the space quietly, lying down with careful movements. John watched for a moment, feeling a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and protective instinct. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew that this woman, silent, tall, and mysterious, was no ordinary guest. She was someone remarkable. As he blew out the lamp and climbed into his own bed, John reflected on the day. The auction, the strange bidding, the journey home. It had all been surreal. Yet there was a sense of rightness in it, as if fate had placed her in his life for a reason. He couldn't explain why he felt that way, but he did. Brace. And as he drifted to sleep, he realized that the quiet woman with the sack over her head had already begun to leave a lasting impression on him, one that would not fade easily. The night passed slowly. Occasionally, John would hear the soft rustle of movement from the guest room, but it was never disruptive. He imagined her thinking, observing, perhaps planning. And in the morning he knew the mystery would continue. The day ahead would bring questions, revelations, and perhaps the first steps toward understanding who she was and why she had come into his life. The morning sun spilled into the guest room, filling it with golden light. John Miller woke to the quiet sounds of the ranch, the soft clucking of chickens, the distant lowing of cows, and the gentle rustle of wind through the trees. For a moment he lay in bed, listening. His mind wandered back to the strange, silent woman who had arrived at his ranch the day before. She had remained calm, composed, and entirely mysterious, and that had left a lasting impression on him.
Today he decided would be different. He had spent all night thinking about her. He realized that he had to know her name.
He had to hear her voice, even if only a few words. The silence had been intriguing, yes, but curiosity now demanded action. He quietly got dressed, careful not to wake the woman, and stepped into the small kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast. The smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee filled the room, and he hoped that the aroma would draw her out of the guest room. As he carried the tray of food, he hesitated at the door. She was sitting by the window as she had the night before, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The sack still covered her head, hiding her features. But when she sensed him, she looked toward him, and for the first time, John felt the weight of anticipation in the room. Her calm, tall figure seemed even more commanding in the soft morning light. "Good morning," John said gently, unsure if she would respond. "I've brought some breakfast for you." Instead, she lifted a hand slightly and nodded, a small, deliberate motion that carried a sense of dignity. John smiled softly, feeling encouraged. The nod was acknowledgement, the first sign of communication, however subtle, and it made him realize that patience was key.
He placed the tray carefully on the table in front of her and stepped back, giving her space.
She removed the sack slowly, with a care that suggested both habit and thoughtfulness. When the fabric fell away, John finally saw her face for the first time. Her eyes, large and dark, seemed to hold countless untold stories, and her high cheekbones gave her a look of quiet determination. Her hair was dark and fell in a soft wave around her shoulders. She was taller than most women John had seen, her presence commanding attention without effort. For a moment, neither of them spoke. John found himself staring, not out of rudeness, but out of awe. The woman smiled faintly, almost shyly, and in that small gesture the room seemed to lighten. Round, she finally spoke in a calm, clear voice. "My name is Martha Lane." John felt a wave of relief. The sound of her voice was melodic, calm, and steady. "Martha," he repeated softly, letting the name settle in his mind. "It's Brace. Nice to meet you, Martha." She nodded slightly, acknowledging the sentiment without speaking further. John realized that her silence until now had not been rudeness. It had been observation, thought, and perhaps caution. She had chosen when and how to reveal herself, and that made her seem all the more dignified and wise. They ate breakfast together in quiet harmony. Martha did not talk much, but she listened, and her occasional comments were thoughtful and precise. She asked about the ranch, about John's work, and about the life he had lived. In turn, John shared stories of his childhood on the land, his father's lessons about hard work, and the quiet satisfaction he found in tending animals. Each word seemed to draw them closer, creating a sense of shared understanding. After breakfast, John suggested they take a walk around the ranch. Martha agreed, her movements graceful as she followed him into the yard. The sun was warm, and the fields stretched endlessly around them. John noticed how Martha's presence changed the familiar landscape. He saw the animals react differently to her. Horses nuzzled her hand when she offered it. Cows seemed calmer, and even the dogs approached her with quiet respect. John could not explain it, but she had a way of moving through the world that seemed to bring out the best in it. As they walked, John felt compelled to ask more about her story. "Martha," he said cautiously, "you've been through a lot, haven't you? I can see it in your eyes. You've faced challenges, and yet here you are, standing tall and calm. Can you tell me why you were at the auction?"
Martha looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes held a mixture of caution and trust.
Desk. Finally she spoke, her voice steady. "I had no place to go. My family, they didn't understand me, and I could not stay. I was not treated fairly. I chose to leave, to find a place where I could be free, where I could live on my own terms." He understood the feeling of isolation, of living quietly and doing what one believed was right, even when others did not approve. "I see," he said softly. "And you chose to trust me, even before knowing me. That takes courage."
Artha's lips curved into a small smile. "You seem different."
Calm, steady. I could tell that you would not mock or harm me. "That alone was enough to trust you!" John felt a warmth spread through him. Her words were simple, yet they carried immense weight.
He realized that their meeting was not a coincidence.
It was fate, perhaps, or at least a rare chance for two people to meet under extraordinary circumstances and find understanding.
They spent the morning walking through the fields, talking quietly about everyday things.
John showed Martha the barns, the stables, and the pastures. She asked questions, not out of curiosity alone, but with a genuine interest in understanding the life he had built. He explained how he cared for each animal, how he managed the land, and how he maintained the balance between work and solitude. Martha listened, absorbing each detail, her presence grounding him in a way he had never experienced before. Break. By noon, they returned to the house. John prepared a simple lunch while Martha rested in the guest room. He reflected on the morning and realized how much he had already grown attached to her presence. The way she moved, spoke, and observe the world made him see his own life differently. There was a sense of possibility now, something beyond the quiet routine he had known for decades. After lunch, Martha suggested they sit on the porch to watch the horizon. The sky was vast and clear, the kind of endless blue that made one feel both small and alive. They sat in comfortable silence, sharing the view without the need for constant words. Occasionally, Martha would point out a bird in the distance or a pattern in the clouds. John found himself smiling more than he had in years, appreciating the simple beauty of the moment and the companionship of someone who truly understood the value of quiet observation. As the afternoon passed, John felt a deepening respect for Martha. Breaths.
She was independent, intelligent, and remarkably strong, yet she carried herself with humility and grace. She did not demand attention, yet her presence commanded it.
Rasp. He realized that she was unlike anyone he had ever met, and he began to see the beginnings of a bond that went beyond curiosity. There was trust forming, fragile yet undeniable, built on shared respect and careful observation. In the evening, John suggested they light a fire outside. The cool breeze of the plains had settled in, and a fire would provide warmth and comfort. Martha agreed, and together they gathered wood and built a modest flame. Sitting by the fire, they talked about small dreams and hopes, nothing extravagant, just simple visions of life filled with peace and meaning. Martha spoke of her desire for freedom, for a life where she could make choices without fear. John spoke of his desire for stability, for connection, and for a sense of purpose beyond the daily routines of ranch life. Breath. The night deepened and the stars emerged one by one, dotting the sky with brilliance. Martha looked up, her eyes reflecting the light, and John felt a quiet awe. Here was someone who had walked through hardship, who had faced the uncertainty of being sold at an auction, and yet she remained composed, thoughtful, and full of life. He realized that the first step of understanding her had been taken, but there was still much to learn. Her story was hers to share, and he would wait patiently for her to reveal more. By the time they returned to the house, a sense of calm had settled over them. Martha prepared for bed with careful movements, and John felt a protective instinct he had not experienced before. He did not know the full story of her past, but he knew that he wanted to be part of her present and future. For the first time in years, he felt that life could hold surprises that were not frightening but inspiring, that a single encounter could change everything. Brett. As John lay in his own bed that night, he reflected on the day's events. Martha's name, her voice, her story. They had all become a part of his thoughts. He realized that the mystery was no longer merely about the sack over her head or the auction. The mystery was about who she truly was, and he was eager to discover it. More importantly, he felt a sense of hope he had not known for years, a hope that the presence of this remarkable woman could bring new meaning to his life. And so, the night ended not with questions, but with understanding. Martha Lane had revealed herself, her name, and a glimpse of her story. John Miller had seen her strength, her calm, and her courage. The bond between them had begun to take shape, fragile yet undeniable, setting the stage for the next chapter of their lives together. The journey of curiosity, trust, and growing admiration had only just begun, and both of them knew that the days ahead would be filled with discovery, challenge, and perhaps even the kind of connection that only extraordinary circumstances could create. The days after Martha revealed her name were filled with quiet, steady companionship. John Miller and Martha Lane settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. The ranch, which had always been a place of solitude for John, now carried the presence of someone who was thoughtful, observant, and quietly strong. Together they tended to the animals, repaired fences, and worked in the fields. Martha moved with the same grace she had shown from the moment John first saw her, her tall frame making even the simplest tasks seem effortless. John found himself watching her often, not out of suspicion or curiosity alone, but out of admiration. She had a way of noticing things he had never paid attention to. The way the wind shifted the grass, the subtle patterns in the sky, the small details in the animal's behavior. Best, her calm observation made him more aware, more patient, and more connected to the land he had called home for so long. Martha, in turn, seemed to enjoy the simplicity of ranch life. First, she asked questions, offered suggestions, and even found joy in the repetitive work of feeding animals and repairing tools. John noticed that when she smiled, the world seemed lighter, as if her calm presence carried a kind of quiet magic. She did not speak much about her past, but he did not press her. He had learned from their first conversations that trust could not be rushed. She would share what she chose to share when she was ready, and he respected that completely. One morning, as the sun rose over the fields, John suggested they take a walk beyond the ranch, to the small creek that ran along the edge of the property. It was a place he often went to think and to find peace, and he wanted to share it with her. Martha agreed, and they walked side by side, their steps in quiet harmony. The creek sparkled in the early light, and the birds sang as if celebrating the new companionship in John's life. "Martha," John said quietly, breaking the silence, "I know we have only known each other a short time, but I feel different. Having you here, working beside me, sharing this life, it feels like I've been waiting for this all along." Martha looked at him, her dark eyes calm but filled with warmth. Breaths. She nodded slowly. "I feel the same," she said. "I have spent a long time alone, uncertain of where I belong. But here, with you, I feel at home." John felt a wave of relief and happiness. He had never imagined that such words could be exchanged so naturally. Yet here they were, sharing a truth that was quietly growing between them. He realized that the connection they were building was more than friendship. It was a bond of respect, trust, and understanding, something rare, something precious. Over the following weeks, life at the ranch continued peacefully. Neighbors and townspeople noticed the change in John. He was more cheerful, more engaged, and often seen with Martha by his side. Some whispered about the unusual circumstances of how she came into his life. But John did not care. To him, the details of the auction, the burlap sack, and the strange beginning mattered less than the reality of their growing connection. Martha had become a part of his world in a way that felt natural and right. One evening, after a long day of work, John and Martha sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of orange and pink. The air was warm, carrying the scent of hay and wild flowers. The quiet of the ranch seemed perfect, untouched by the noise of the town or the chaos of the world beyond. John took a deep breath, feeling the moment in his chest like a steady, quiet flame. "Martha," he began, his voice gentle but certain. "I know this may seem sudden, but I have been thinking. You came into my life in the strangest way, yet it feels like you were always meant to be here. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" She turned her face toward him, her expression unreadable yet open. Then she smiled softly, the kind of smile that made the heart feel calm and warm. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, John."
I will marry you. John felt a rush of joy and relief.
The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was profound. Breath. They had found something extraordinary in each other, a trust, a bond, and a quiet love that had grown naturally from respect and shared understanding. The preparations for the wedding were modest. John and Martha wanted a ceremony that reflected the simplicity and sincerity of their lives. There were no grand invitations, no elaborate decorations, only the essentials. A few neighbors who had known John for years were invited to witness the occasion. The ranch itself, with its wide-open fields, grazing animals, and the warm light of the sun, became the perfect setting. On the day of the wedding, the morning was crisp and clear. Martha wore a simple white dress that complemented her tall figure, and John dressed in his best work clothes, neat and clean, yet unpretentious. They stood together in the open field, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the ranch and a handful of friends. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt, and deeply personal. There were no grand speeches, only words of sincerity, promises to respect, support, and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. As they exchanged vows, John looked into Martha's eyes and felt a sense of completeness he had never known. He remembered the day he had bid $2 at the auction, not knowing who she truly was, not knowing her name, and not knowing the impact she would have on his life. And now, standing beside her as they promised to share their lives, he realized that every moment of uncertainty, every strange twist of fate, had led to this. Martha's voice was calm and steady as she spoke her vows. Promise to stand beside him, to share in the joys and challenges of life on the ranch, and to build a life filled with respect, understanding, and love. John felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had never imagined finding someone so remarkable, someone who could understand him so completely and bring warmth, laughter, and meaning into his quiet existence. After the ceremony, the small group celebrated simply. There was food, laughter, and shared stories. The animals, too, seemed to sense the happiness, moving quietly in the pastures, as if honoring the moment. John and Martha walked together among the fields, hand in hand, talking quietly about the future. They spoke of small dreams, planting more flowers near the house, repairing the old barn, perhaps one day adopting a few animals in need. Their plans were simple, but they were shared, and that made them profound. As evening fell, the sky turned shades of violet and gold. John and Martha stood on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. The quiet of the ranch felt perfect, like a world created just for them. John realized that the journey from a dusty auction, a burlap sack, and $2 had led to something extraordinary. It had led to trust, companionship, and a love that was grounded in understanding and respect. In the days that followed, life at the ranch settled into a joyful routine. John and Martha continued to work side by side, sharing responsibilities and finding joy in small victories. The repair of a fence, the birth of a calf, the blooming of flowers near the house. Their connection deepened, not through grand gestures, but through everyday acts of care, patience, and mutual respect.
Neighbors who once whispered now nodded in approval.
Perfectly. Two people who had found balance, trust, and happiness in the most unexpected way. The story of how Martha came into John's life, purchased for $2 at an auction, became less important than the life they were building together. It was no longer a story of mystery or curiosity. It was a story of love, trust, and the extraordinary power of kindness and understanding. John often thought about that first day, about the moment he had lifted her into the wagon and felt a strange, unexplainable connection. He realized that life sometimes offered unexpected surprises, and that taking a chance, even in the strangest circumstances, could lead to happiness beyond imagination. Martha, too, reflected on that day. She understood that trusting someone, allowing herself to be seen, and embracing the uncertainty of life had brought her freedom, companionship, and a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Their marriage was not just a ceremony, it was the beginning of a partnership rooted in trust, patience, and mutual respect. Every day they discovered more about each other, more about themselves, and more about the quiet beauty of life lived together. But as the years passed, the ranch became a place of warmth, laughter, and love, a place where two people, brought together in the most unusual way, had created a life that was simple, fulfilling, and extraordinary all at once. On quiet evenings when the sun dipped low and the sky turned brilliant shades of red and gold, John and Martha would stand side by side, looking over the fields, the barns, and the animals that had become their shared responsibility. They would remember the strange auction, the burlap sack, the $2 bid, and smile at how life had a way of surprising those who were patient, brave, and open to the unexpected. And in that quiet, shared life, John and Martha Lane found something that was rare and beautiful. A love that had grown from trust, curiosity, and the courage to embrace the unknown. It was a love that was simple yet profound, ordinary yet extraordinary, and it was theirs entirely.